He walked into his own dealership dressed like an ordinary customer, muddy boots, old truck, no title in sight. What he discovered inside confirmed the whispers he'd been hearing for weeks. Some customers were seen, others were ignored. But when the staff finally learned who he really was, everything changed, and not everyone would walk away with their job. He walked into his own dealership dressed like an ordinary customer, muddy boots, old truck, no title in sight. What he discovered inside confirmed the whispers he'd been hearing for weeks. Some customers were seen, others were ignored. But when the staff finally learned who he really was, everything changed, and not everyone would walk away with their job. Maurice Bennett eased his old F-150 into the farthest parking spot on the cracked asphalt lot of Bennett Auto Group, the Oklahoma sun already climbing high and merciless in the wide Tulsa sky. He let the engine tick as he turned the key, its hum fading into the drone of distant cicadas and the whir of passing traffic. The truck, a dusty two-tone relic with one headlight fogged and the bumper hanging a little low, wasn't much to look at. But that was the point. Maurice climbed out slowly, tugging the brim of his cap lower over his eyes. His jeans were worn, his t-shirt soft with age, and his boots, caked in dry red dirt, looked like they'd just come off a roofing job. Not a single employee looked his way as he approached the glass doors of the dealership that bore his family name. That was exactly how he wanted it. He hadn't stepped foot in the showroom in nearly 3 weeks, letting the day-to-day fall to managers, sales reps, and assistants. But he'd been watching. 3 separate messages had made their way to him in just the past month, quiet ones, unofficial ones. A longtime customer emailed to say he felt talked down to by a salesperson who didn't seem to think he was serious. A woman from North Tulsa said she and her brother stood at the front desk for 10 minutes with no greeting while white customers who arrived after them were helped right away. His assistant, Camille, had hesitantly forwarded a Yelp review left by a young black father who said no one would even show him the kid-friendly SUVs. Maurice had wanted to believe these were isolated incidents, bad moments from good people. But something deeper in his gut told him otherwise. He had learned long ago to trust that feeling. The dealership gleamed under the sun, its rows of spotless trucks lined like trophies. Inside, the cool air and scent of leather greeted him like a memory. The sales staff were gathered loosely near the reception area, chatting, checking their phones, laughing low. No one noticed the man in the boots and beat-up cap. A woman at the desk didn't even glance up as he passed. He moved slowly, taking his time, scanning the floor. Then came the moment that mattered. Maurice made his way toward the pre-owned section, his eyes settling on a red Ford Explorer with decent miles and a price tag that looked about right for a working family. That's when he heard it, the dry voice from behind. "Need something?" It wasn't a question. It was a flat line. Maurice turned to see a tall man with thinning hair and a name tag that read Todd. Clipboard in hand, expression tight, Todd looked at him the way you look at someone who's going to waste your afternoon. "Looking for something specific," he added, barely suppressing a sigh. "Used trucks, maybe midsize," Maurice said casually. "Nothing fancy. Just something reliable." Todd jerked his chin. "They're all over there. Left side lot. Can't miss it. No handshake. No name. No welcome." Maurice offered a nod that meant nothing and stepped toward the used lot. But before he got 3 steps in, he caught something from the corner of his eye. A black SUV pulled up, new, sleek, spotless. Out stepped a young white couple, maybe early 30s, dressed in pastel polos and sunglasses, chatting as they walked toward the entrance. Before their feet touched the showroom floor, a younger salesman had already jogged over to greet them. "Hey there. Welcome in, y'all. Can I grab you some coffee or water while we take a look? AC's working perfect inside too, by the way." Maurice watched, silent. His eyes moved between the grinning salesman and the couple, who hadn't even said what they were looking for yet. He turned back toward the Explorer, letting his fingers trail along the side panel. A bit of dust on the finish, but nothing major. Behind him, Todd reappeared. "That one's got a little over 110 on the mileage," he muttered, not bothering to make eye contact. "Runs okay, I guess." I think we've got the records somewhere. You want me to ask someone? Maurice straightened slowly. Yeah, he said, voice easy. I'd like to take a look at the service history. Maybe even test drive it if that's possible. Todd sighed, clearly irritated. Sure. I'll go get the keys. As Todd disappeared again, Maurice pulled out his phone, tapped open his Notes app, and typed a line, Red Explorer, 110K, rep didn't know mileage, didn't offer history, 0 engagement. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked into the truck's window. In the reflection, he saw a man in his early 50s, salt in his beard, lines at the corners of his eyes. Not the image most people associated with a CEO, but then again, Maurice had never cared much for images. What came next wasn't subtle. A few minutes later, Todd returned, keys in one hand, a printout in the other. Here you go, he said, tossing the papers onto the hood like they were junk mail. 20 minutes okay for a test drive? Maurice scanned the maintenance log, bare bones. A couple oil changes, 1 tire rotation, a new battery. The dates didn't match the mileage. Thanks, he said, folding the paper and slipping it into his back pocket. Mind if I ask a couple things before I take it out? Todd sighed again. What now? Any accident history? How many owners? You mentioned it runs okay. That mean it's got quirks I should know about? Todd shrugged. Nothing major. Maybe 2, 3 owners. Don't quote me. It's been an fender bender, I think. No big deal. You want to drive it or not? Maurice smiled slightly. I do. But I figure if I was buying it, I should know what I'm walking into. Todd didn't answer. He turned on his heel and walked off again. Maurice shook his head, started the engine, and pulled out of the lot. The seat squeaked. The AC groaned. He circled a few blocks slowly, letting the experience sit in his bones. He wasn't angry, yet. But he was clear. What he'd just seen wasn't customer service. It was contempt in casual clothes. When he returned, he parked in the same spot and stepped inside. The showroom was alive with chatter and cool air. The white couple now sat comfortably at a desk, sipping bottled water while the young salesman showed them digital specs on a laptop screen. Nobody looked at Maurice. Not the receptionist. Not the manager scrolling on his phone. He could have been a ghost. He approached the desk. The receptionist finally looked up. I just test drove the Red Explorer, he said. I'm interested in moving forward. She stared blankly. Which one? Red Explorer. About 110,000 miles. I have the key. She typed, slowly. Let me find someone to assist you. Maurice waited. Todd returned, clipboard in hand, expression unchanged. You ready to talk numbers? Maurice nodded. Let's. They moved to a corner desk. Todd tapped at his keyboard like it owed him something. You got financing? Or cash? Cash. Todd blinked. Really? Is that a problem? No. Just, most folks don't. Maurice leaned back. I'm not most folks. They went through the motions, price, fees, add-ons. Maurice declined every upsell. Across the room, he noticed something that made his stomach twist. A young black man, maybe 20, maybe younger, stood awkwardly near the entrance, a folder in hand. No one approached him. No one said a word. After a minute of looking around, the kid turned and walked out. No pitch. No contact. Nothing. Morris's jaw tightened. The conversation at Todd's desk stalled as a sharp voice rang out from across the room. Why is he getting help while I've been waiting here 10 minutes? It came from another customer, older, frustrated, loud. But what happened next would ripple far deeper than anyone could have expected. And Maurice, still sitting at the desk with the keys in hand and the truth heavy in his chest, knew this day was about to become something much bigger than a car sale. Maurice sat still at the corner desk, keys in hand, while Todd tapped listlessly at his keyboard, the glow from the monitor flickering faintly across his face. Across the showroom, the air had shifted. The sharp voice from the older customer still echoed faintly in the background, but no one responded to her complaint. Not the receptionist, who had returned to staring blankly at her screen. Not the other salesmen, who remained comfortably posted near their assigned corners. Not even the manager, who glanced up for half a second before going right back to scrolling on his phone. The young black man who had walked in earlier, Jalen, was long gone. Maurice had seen him wait at the front for nearly 5 minutes, holding a folder in his hands, eyes scanning the room with quiet hope. Not a single person greeted him. No one asked if he needed help. And then he turned and walked back out into the sun like he'd never stepped inside at all. That image stuck in Morris's chest like a hook. Todd pushed the printout toward him, clearing his throat like the numbers on the paper were about to seal a deal. "If everything looks good, we can move forward," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. Maurice picked up the paper, skimmed the list of charges, dealer fees, an overpriced warranty, a tire rotation package he hadn't asked for. "And if I had come in wearing a polo shirt and khakis," Maurice said calmly, "you think this conversation would have gone any differently?" Todd blinked, confused, like the question had come from a different language. "What?" he said, half a laugh in his voice. "I don't follow." Maurice folded the sheet in half, laid it gently back on the desk, then reached into the inside pocket of his work jacket. Slowly, he pulled out a leather wallet, not the kind that holds credit cards, but the kind that opens flat to reveal an embossed metal badge and a nameplate with a title. Maurice looked Todd in the eye for the first time since stepping foot into the showroom. "Maurice Bennett," he said, voice low but unmistakably firm. "Owner of this dealership." For a moment, everything stopped. Todd froze, his hand still halfway to his mouse. His eyes darted from the badge to Morris's face, then to the front desk, like he was waiting for someone to jump in and say this was a joke. No one did. Behind them, the receptionist's chair squeaked as she turned toward the commotion, her eyes widening as she overheard. A silence settled over the showroom that felt too sharp to be accidental. Even the AC vents seemed quieter now. Maurice stood. His boots thudded softly against the floor. He turned toward the center of the room. "Excuse me," he said, projecting his voice just loud enough for the entire team to hear. "Can I have everyone's attention for a moment?" Conversations died. Phones were pocketed. The manager finally stood up from behind his desk, brows furrowed, unsure what he'd just walked into. "My name is Maurice Bennett," he continued, scanning each face one by one. "I'm the founder and sole owner of Bennett Auto Group. And today, I came in dressed like any working-class customer who might walk in off the street, no title, no fanfare, because I needed to see for myself how folks are being treated when no one's watching." He let that sit for a second. No one spoke. "What I saw today," he added, turning slightly back toward Todd, "was exactly what I hoped wasn't true." Todd's face had lost all its color. "Mr. Bennett, sir, I didn't know." Maurice raised a hand to stop him. "That's the point," he said, his tone sharper now. "You didn't care to know. You didn't think twice before brushing me off. You didn't offer your name. You didn't ask questions. You didn't even pretend to try. Because you looked at me and saw someone who couldn't afford to be taken seriously." He paused. "And what's worse is that you weren't just indifferent, you were dismissive. You didn't see a customer. You saw an inconvenience." A murmur rippled through the group of employees now clustered awkwardly near the reception counter. The older white customer who had shouted earlier was still standing nearby, her arms crossed, clearly absorbing the scene with a mix of smug satisfaction and disbelief. Maurice turned to face the entire room. "Let me be clear," he said. "What happened to me today isn't unique. I have 3 different complaints on my desk, 2 from black customers, 1 from a Latino family, who came in, asked for help, and were ignored. All in the last 60 days. And what I saw today confirmed exactly what they felt, that this dealership, under my name, has become a place where people aren't treated with equal dignity." Todd took a step forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was just doing my job." Maurice faced him squarely. "No. You were doing what you've gotten comfortable doing, judging people based on their shoes, their shirt, their accent, the color of their skin. And that ends today." The words landed like a hammer. Then, softly but with no room for misinterpretation, he added, "You're done here, Todd." Effective immediately. Todd's mouth fell open. "Sir, I didn't mean." "You didn't have to mean it," Maurice said. "You still did it." A cold silence stretched across the room. The receptionist turned back to her monitor without saying a word. One of the younger salesmen quietly walked into the service bay. Maurice scanned the room again. "If any of you think your job is just to move vehicles, you're in the wrong business," he said. "Your job is to serve people. All people. The truck is the product, but trust is the sale. And if we can't do that with integrity, then we don't deserve to do it at all." A small voice spoke from the back corner of the room. "Mr. Bennett?" It was a young woman, early 20s, with a soft expression and her hair pulled into a tight bun. She stepped forward slowly from the hallway near accounting. "I'm Kenya. Kenya Ramirez. I work in the back office, mostly admin, invoices, and scheduling." Maurice nodded. "Go ahead." Kenya took a breath. "I just wanted to say, I've seen this too. I've seen how different customers get treated depending on how they look, what they wear, even what kind of car they drive up in. I've tried to say something before, but," she hesitated, "I got told to mind my pay grade." The room shifted again. A few employees looked away. One man coughed quietly. Kenya's voice grew stronger. "I didn't feel safe speaking up. I thought someone higher up would eventually notice, but maybe we all thought someone else would do it." Maurice nodded again, this time slower. "Thank you, Kenya, for saying it now. It matters." He turned to the staff again. "From this point forward, change isn't optional. We're rewriting how this dealership shows up, for every customer, every time. Kenya," he looked back at her, "I want you to move into a new role, guest experience lead. Your job is to be a voice for the people walking through those doors. I need someone in that position who sees what I saw today and isn't afraid to speak when something feels wrong." Her eyes widened. "You want me?" "I do," he said. "You've already shown me more leadership than some of the people who've been here 10 years. Maurice took a final glance around the room. "There will be a mandatory staff meeting tomorrow morning. We'll talk about training, policy, expectations, and what happens next. Today was a wake-up call. I won't let this place become a machine that filters people out because of bias and assumption. This isn't just about selling cars. It's about building a business that deserves the community it serves." No one applauded. No one smiled. And Maurice didn't want them to. The silence he left behind was exactly the one he intended, a silence that forced everyone to sit with what had just been exposed. He walked to the exit without fanfare, pushing open the glass door and stepping back into the dry Oklahoma heat. But even as the warmth hit his skin, his thoughts were already elsewhere. There was one more thing he needed to do before the day ended. One more conversation he hadn't finished yet. Someone who had walked in and been left behind. And Maurice Bennett wasn't done until he made it right. Maurice stepped out into the afternoon heat, the Oklahoma sun pressing down on his shoulders as he paused just beyond the dealership's glass doors. Behind him, the silence still lingered, the weight of his words settling over the staff like dust after a storm. The dry air buzzed with the sound of distant tires against asphalt and the low whistle of wind between buildings. But Maurice wasn't thinking about the tension inside anymore. His mind had moved elsewhere, back to that moment earlier in the day when a young man, maybe 20, stood quietly at the front desk, holding a manila folder and looking around with hesitant hope, only to be met with silence and blank stares. Jalen. Maurice hadn't needed a name tag or an introduction to feel the impact of what had happened. The kid hadn't been loud. He hadn't caused a scene. He'd simply waited, been ignored, and left. And it had burned into Morris's memory like a brand. He could have let it go, chalked it up as just another day in a broken system, but that wasn't who he was, not anymore. Not after everything he had just witnessed firsthand. He pulled his truck keys from his pocket, paused at the door of the F-150, then turned in the opposite direction and started walking. He didn't know exactly where Jalen had gone, but he had a hunch. 2 blocks later, just past the intersection where the old hardware store sat boarded up and forgotten, Maurice spotted the bus stop, a steel bench under a faded plexiglass shelter half covered in sun-bleached flyers. And there he was. Jalen sat with his elbows on his knees, headphones in, the same folder tucked under one arm, his eyes focused on some distant spot down the road. He looked like someone who had stopped expecting good news a long time ago. Maurice approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Hey," he called out gently. Jalen turned, pulling out one earbud, his brow furrowing in cautious recognition. "You were at the dealership," Maurice said, offering a nod. "I saw you come in. I also saw no one helped you." Jalen blinked, unsure what to say. "It's all right," he finally muttered. "It happens." Maurice stepped closer, his voice steady. "It shouldn't." That made Jalen pause. Maurice extended a hand. "Maurice Bennett. I own the place." Jalen's eyes widened just slightly, his posture shifting with quiet surprise. "You're the owner?" "That's right." Maurice gave a tired smile. "And I'd like you to come back in, with me. As my guest. Not as just another walk-in." Jalen looked at the dealership down the street, then back at Maurice. "You serious?" "Dead serious," Maurice replied. "What happened this morning isn't how we do business. At least, not anymore. That changes today." A few seconds passed. Jalen nodded slowly, the barest flicker of trust breaking through the surface of his uncertainty. They walked back together, side by side. No grand announcements. No speeches. Just a man who refused to stay silent and a young customer who deserved better. When they stepped through the glass doors once again, the showroom had shifted. Employees stood straighter. Faces were alert. There was no pretending now, they knew exactly who Maurice was, and more importantly, what he expected. Kenya Ramirez was already at the front, her expression clear and composed, like someone who had been waiting for this moment her whole life. She stepped forward and greeted Jalen with a warmth that was sincere, not rehearsed. "Welcome back," she said with a kind smile. "Let's find you something that fits what you need." Jalen glanced between her and Maurice, then gave a quiet nod. Kenya led him toward the pre-owned section, asking questions, explaining options, treating him like he mattered. And Maurice? Maurice stood back, arms crossed, watching. He didn't hover. He didn't interfere. He simply observed as the culture he had just shattered began to reshape itself in real time. A few staff members stole glances his way. One young salesman looked genuinely ashamed. The receptionist, now standing beside her desk instead of hiding behind it, offered a faint but respectful nod. It wasn't perfection, but it was a start. 20 minutes later, Kenya returned with Jalen at her side. "He's interested in the Black Fusion SE," she said. "Clean title, low miles, priced fairly. It fits his budget and checks out mechanically." Maurice looked to Jalen. "Sound good to you?" Jalen hesitated, then smiled for the first time. "Yeah. Real good." Maurice nodded. "Then let's make it happen. No red tape. No pressure. No upsell games. Just honest business." As Kenya took Jalen to finalize paperwork, Maurice turned back toward the large showroom windows. The sunlight had shifted, casting long streaks across the polished tile floors. Outside, the lot glowed with promise, not because of the inventory, but because of the people who would soon walk through those doors and be seen, heard, and respected. Maurice exhaled deeply, a sense of calm rising in his chest. He knew full well that culture didn't change in one afternoon. Bias didn't vanish just because it was called out. But this was the foundation. Today, they'd drawn a line. From now on, his name above the door wouldn't just mean ownership. It would mean something more. It would mean fairness, integrity, and most importantly, action. Kenya approached him quietly as Jalen reviewed documents at a nearby desk. "You meant what you said earlier?" she asked. "About building this place different?" Maurice met her gaze. "Every word." She nodded. "Then I'm in. All the way." "Good," he said. "We're going to need people who aren't afraid to speak up. Starting now." She smiled, then returned to assist Jalen with the final steps of his purchase. Maurice walked toward the exit again, this time with a different kind of purpose in his stride. He stepped outside, the air still warm but not oppressive. His truck sat where he had left it. He climbed in, started the engine, and let it idle for a minute. He didn't rush. He wasn't running from anything. Not today. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he had done more than just own a business. He had honored his name, his upbringing, and every person who had ever been overlooked just because they didn't look like a preferred customer. As he pulled out onto the road, he glanced in the rearview mirror. The dealership stood tall behind him, the words Bennett Auto Group gleaming in silver across the glass. But it wasn't the building that gave him pride. It was what had happened inside. Some people leave legacies with awards, titles, and plaques. Maurice wanted to leave something else, something better. A place where no one had to prove their worth just to be treated like they mattered. A place where someone like Jalen could walk in and walk out with dignity intact. He drove slow, steady, past streets he knew, past neighborhoods that had shaped him, with the quiet conviction of a man who didn't just demand change, he delivered it. Because leadership wasn't about standing on a pedestal. It was about walking the floor. Listening. Acting. And lifting others as you rose. Sometimes, the most powerful moments of change don't come from shouting or slamming fists, they come from quiet actions done with conviction. Maurice Bennett didn't walk into his dealership looking for a fight. He walked in looking for the truth. What he found confirmed what too many people already know, that bias doesn't always wear a badge or raise its voice. Sometimes, it shows up in silence. In who gets offered help, and who doesn't even get noticed. The lesson in this story is simple, but urgent: how we treat people matters. Whether we're a business owner, a customer, or someone just passing through, the way we choose to acknowledge or ignore someone can shape their entire day, and in some cases, their belief in the fairness of the world. Maurice could have ignored what he saw. He could have brushed it off or dealt with it behind closed doors. But instead, he chose the harder path. He chose to speak truth in a room full of silence. He held people accountable, not with anger, but with clarity. And by doing that, he didn't just fire a man. He flipped a mirror onto a culture and said, "This is who we've become. But it's not who we have to be." To every business owner listening, your brand isn't just your logo or your product, it's the feeling someone has when they walk through your door. Are they seen? Are they respected? Are they treated like they belong? If the answer isn't yes, for everyone, then it's time to rebuild, brick by brick, person by person. And to every individual who's ever felt invisible in a place where they should have been treated with dignity, I see you. Morris's story is for you. You shouldn't have to wear a suit, speak a certain way, or prove your worth to be treated with basic respect. Fairness should never be optional. And silence should never be our default. Let this story remind us that leadership isn't about power, it's about responsibility. It's about using your voice not just when it's convenient, but when it's necessary. It's about making sure the next Jalen who walks through the door gets a handshake, a seat, and a chance. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story. On behalf of U.S. Instructive Stories, we're truly honored that you've chosen to spend part of your day with us. If this message resonated with you, if it reminded you of something you've seen or felt, please don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Talk about it. Let's be part of the conversation that turns empathy into action. And remember, it only takes one person to set a new standard. Maybe that person is you. We'll see you in the next story. Stay kind, stay brave, and stay watching.